Thank y'all for being here. I see some familiar faces back again. I'm Dan Turner, Head of Programming and Outreach for the Georgetown County Library System, and we are back again with Digibridge 2.0, the series of 12 humanities lectures by local experts on various aspects of Georgetown County's deep, diverse history and culture. All presentations are free and open to the public. In March, we began the series at our brand new Southern Georgetown Library out on Powell Road in Georgetown. And in April, we've been here at our wonderful Carvers Bay Library on Choppy Road in Hemingway. And we've been so grateful for the hospitality. And we want to say thank you again to our branch manager, Marilyn, Lance, Rob, and all the folks here, the staff who have been so gracious to us. So we hope this will be our finale here for Digibridge 2.0, our last presentation of 4 here, but we hope folks will keep coming out and visiting here at Carvers Bay afterwards, and we hope to come back again in future. In May, we'll close out the Digibridge 2.0 series in Andrews, at our Andrews Library on North Morgan Avenue. So we'll keep going after this for 4 more presentations. All 12 presentations will also be made available for viewing on the Georgetown County Library YouTube page. So we'll edit these presentations, the videos, and put them up there for viewing or reviewing afterwards. The series is supported with a growth grant from South Carolina Humanities with funding provided from the National Endowment for the Humanities, or NEH. South Carolina Humanities is a not-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. And we're ending here today not with a whimper, but with a great bang, a wonderful local treasure, really, talent and treasure, Marlanda Dekine. And I know folks out there, some of you recognize that last name, the Dekine last name, and Marlanda Dekine is doing the last name, her family, and the area very proud. So we're very lucky to have her here and to close off our presentations here at Carvers Bay Library. Marlanda Dekine is a poet and educator who is obsessed with ancestry and memory. Their collection, Thresh and Hold, and there's a stack of these right behind me, Thresh and Hold, won the new Southern Voices Poetry Prize and is fresh off the press from Hub City up in Spartanburg, a great independent publisher, nationally known up in Spartanburg, Hub City. And that's a very prestigious prize, the new Southern Voices Poetry Prize that Marlanda won. And so this book is the result of that, which she will sell you. You can buy a copy, she'll sign it for you afterwards. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of that and get a piece of this Georgetown County culture and history. Right? Dekine is a 10-house OwnPath Scholar, a Watering Hole Fellow, and the recipient of the South Carolina Humanities Fresh Voices Award. Their poems appear in Poetry, Emergence, and the Oxford American, among other venues. They reside here in Georgetown with their wise dog, Malachi. So you got to give props to Malachi as well. Yeah. All right. So we're really thrilled, honored, and delighted to have with us today Marlanda Dekine. So please.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you to the Georgetown Library System, and thank you all for being here. The reason why I have to make sure that I include Malachi, my dog, in the bio is because he wrote the book. And if I don't include him, we made an agreement that if I did well with the book, that I had to make sure that he got extra treats, and he has to be in the bio. I'm kidding. But I'm excited to be here. What I plan to do is offer a talk, and then open for questions, and then move into some poems. Does that sound okay? Okay. Our ancestors were filled to the brim with poetry, was my quick response to Dan's request for a title of today's lecture. At the time, it sounded witty and imaginative. When I sat down to write, I thought, what have I done? My mind went blank every time I sat down to write. For months, I'd sit and stare at the screen or at my page, trying to decide to do something else instead of focus on this talk. Our ancestors were filled to the brim with poetry. I redecorated my bookshelf by color. I took more than 2 walks a day with my dog, and I drove to the beach often, avoiding this talk. I want to be a poet. I don't want to be an historian, a scholar, a dreamer, a wanderer. All the while, I know deep inside of me that the poet is and has always been many things, including historian, scholar, orator, dreamer, and more. While I myself haven't been to church on purpose in years, I will always consider Psalms 23 as the first poem I heard and memorized. The funny thing is, I don't remember who taught it to me. It's as if I came into the world knowing the 23rd Psalm. Even though I never get all the lines in the right order, I can always see the images, the pictures in the words. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I decided to start here. The images that stand out to me are lie down in green pastures, the still waters, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thy rod and thy staff, thou anointest my head with oil, I shall dwell in the house of the Lord. My book, Thresh and Hold, is dedicated to imagination, the power of imagination. As a child, I would imagine that green pasture as my family's field of cows next to the house, full of lush green grass. The still waters were the black river that surrounds us right here where we are. The valley could be anywhere. I saw sadness, death, and worry. And my head anointed with oil brought to mind my mother, who would come into my room at night to anoint my head and the bedroom door with oil, a form of spiritual protection. These images and images like these have followed me into my adulthood, and I try my best to make poems out of these images. I've written poetry since I was old enough to write a sentence. I think I might have been 8 when I read my first poem to my family. And when I was younger than I am now, maybe 18, 20, I wanted to get a certain thing on the paper. I wanted to argue with people and make my poem tell them what I wanted them to think. This is what I want to say, and this is how we should all think. I've tried to argue for my ideas about social justice issues, and I've tried to force my pen to say what I wanted to say. These days, y'all, for me, writing is like listening to still waters. It is quiet, and I cannot force it. I have to listen to what the poem wants to be and allow it to guide me through the valley. I sometimes have to go to dark memories to find the dark song, or I hear the dark song calling after me, and I have to go and listen to what it wants. When I think of following this dark song, I think of my grandma Thelma. Anybody know my grandma Thelma? Okay. My grandma Thelma was many things: a daughter, a wife, a mother, the first lady of the church, a lunchroom person, a seamstress, and many other things. Oh, y'all come on in. I'll hold on for a second. I'm filling up. My grandma made many things with her hands. When I moved back home in 2019, I was living in Spartanburg, Greenville, in the upstate of South Carolina. When I moved back home in 2019, I began to realize how many things my grandma made, not only with her hands, but with her speech and her language. I began to realize the things my grandmother made with her words. As I decided to write this, a storm began to arise in Georgetown. Listening to the wind makes me remember my grandma telling her grandkids, me included, to turn off the TV because the Lord was speaking. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, the images and sounds, branches and twigs thrown across the yard, trees waving, the wind humming like an ocean wave, the sound of blackbirds taking flight. I would imagine the voice of the Lord must be its loudest during a hurricane. I think these images continue to play in my mind because God was a big word for me growing up. And to imagine that the natural world might be a visible expression of God's voice amazed and terrified me. Did my grandma know what she was talking about? Was I supposed to be listening to the storm? And if so, what was I supposed to be listening for? Was God angry? And were these images a demonstration of anger or love? Those were questions I had as a child. Here's a poem I wrote about my grandmother, First Lady of the Church. I don't want to remember how she made the Reverend run, praying scriptures like spells while sitting next to peace lilies. So many times I was afraid of her searching for camphor, her tales of the plat eye and hags, burning pine needles, all while laughing at the audacity of wayward men. Grandma Thelma turned trees into so many things. She'd disappear into grapevines unbothered by snakes, return with her brown hands purple and wet. She mashed muscadines into wine like her 8 children, graduations, marriages, her own ever-widening family tree. Grandma Thelma stayed humming and telling folk how God come for we. She called my grandpa Mose because everybody knows he knew God. She knew his hands flung her face into Red Sea blues. His voice shook pews. He came for my grandmother. His hands took her tooth. Grandma Thelma told me I bit a finger into. I just know when I couldn't go to school, with my fever, I'd awaken safely next to the warmth of her wood stove, and she was healing me. I continue to be amazed at what I don't know until the poem is done, or I think the poem is done. Does the speaker in this poem really believe their grandma is healing them in the midst of so much violence? What does the image of a wooden stove do after the image of domestic violence? These are new questions I've learned to ask my poems while they are being written. Am I trying to document my life or let images emerge from my life that tell me more about what was happening at the time? I don't know. My grandmother believed what she did and what she said. Turn that TV off now, the Lord is speaking. I will speculate and say that for her, this was a true statement. For me, these many, many years later, I hear so much poetry in her observation. There is not a time that it rains or storms that I don't think about terror and beauty all at the same time. And this is what I mean when I say our ancestors were filled to the brim with poetry. Now I want you to think for a minute. You can close your eyes if you need to. Matter of fact, let's close your eyes if you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable, find somewhere in the room to stare and focus your eyes and just listen to my voice. I want you to breathe in for 4 seconds and then we're going to breathe out together for 7. So we're breathing in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are slow breaths. Breathe into your stomach. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I want you to bring to mind the landscape, the land around where you grew up. Are there fields? What color is the dirt? Are there trees? Just spend some time looking around inside of your head. What do you see? Think about the land where you grew up. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I want you to bring to mind someone in your life who has passed on, who is no longer here on the earth. And I want you to see that ancestor's face. Just sit with that face for a moment. See it as clearly as you can. Think about your mother, aunts, grandmas, great aunts. Consider your father, uncles, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers. I want you to open your eyes. What were some of their sayings, figures of speech, or ways of saying something that you remember? Does anyone have a saying that comes to mind?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
My dad used to always say,
That's all right.
He used to always say, everything that glitters is not gold.
Everything that glitters is not gold.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you hear the poetry in that? Can you see the image? If something is shiny,
Yeah.
it's shiny. Is it
Just
gold?
because it's shiny,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't make it gold.
It doesn't make it gold.
Right.
Just because it looks good, it doesn't mean it's good for you.
That's right.
So there's poetry in that saying. There's an image right? That means something more than the image alone.
Yeah.
It's a very simple way of looking at poetry, yeah? Anybody else? Any sayings? I know y'all got some. My grandma and grandpa was not the only ones.
My dad, when I was a teenager, he passed on something that his dad passed on to him. And it was simple. He said, son, don't do everything just because you could.
Don't do everything just because you could.
Yeah.
Yes. Because the fact is, we can just, you can just,
Right.
but maybe some restraint.
Yeah.
Something else about poetry, restraint. You might want to say a full paragraph. Poetry asks you to make the line as small as possible to get that same paragraph across. You want to get all of those words into one line if you can, and another line, and another line, and another line. It's about restraint. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
It's better to be a live chicken than a dead duck.
It's that's a good one. It's better to be a live chicken than a dead duck. I have to think about that one. That's going to be with me for some time. Thank you for that. So this goes to my next point. Go further and consider the sayings that not many people would understand. Right? Some people might hear that and go, what? You know, what? So I have an example. My daddy, he tells a story about being outside working with his hat on his head. And when my granddaddy was alive, he kept coming outside and shaking his head, looking at my dad. And my mom's back there about to laugh. She knows the story. And he kept coming outside and just looking at my dad, just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he told him to put a hat on his head. And my dad ignored him. My granddad keeps coming out, just looking and shaking his head. I told you to put a hat on. And my dad finally says, what's the big deal, man? I'm fine. And my granddaddy told him, he used other language. I'll use better language for us right here. If your head is dead, your behind is gone, is what my granddaddy told him. So my dad went and got a hat. Now what we think that meant, because my granddad didn't add extra words to explain it, was that if you catch an illness because your head is exposed to the weather, you're risking your life. Do you hear that? Okay. So my dad went and got a hat. And what I'm after today is highlighting the poet that exists in our people, the people we come from. Because there are tons and tons of poets, and there are tons and tons of books. And poetry has been around for centuries. And sometimes we have a tendency to look outside of us without ever looking at who the people are that raised us, the people that are closest to us, and viewing them as a source of information, as a source of poetry. So instead of viewing canons of poetry as our only literary lineage, our only heritage in books, what are the words, sayings, and stories that were passed on inside of you, not just out in the world? What are the things that are sitting inside of you? So I'd like to read a poem by Larry Neal entitled Holy Days. It comes from a book called Hoodoo Hollerin' Bebop Ghosts. Holy the days of the prune-faced junkie men. Holy the skag-pumped arms. Holy the Harlem faces looking for space in the dead rock valleys of the city. Holy the flowers. Sing holy for the raped holidays and Betsy's guts spilling on the Mississippi Road. Sing holy for all of the faces that inched toward freedom, followed the North Star like Harriet and Douglass. Sing holy for all our singers and sinners, for all the shapes and forms of our liberation. Holy, holy, holy for the midnight hassles, for the gods of our ancestors bellowing sunsets and blues that gave us vision. Oh God, make us strong and ready. Holy, holy, holy for the day we dig ourselves and rise in the sun of our own peace and place and space. Yes, Lord. That's a poem from 1969 by Larry Neal. So I'm going to get into just give me a moment to wax poetic about the poem. This poem is filled with abstractions and imagery. So what you have are words that might mean nothing depending on who looks at them, and then you have images. Some of the images that leaped out at me, and I call this a psalm because it's praising things that we are taught not to praise, right? The prune-faced junkie men, people looking for space in the dead rock, Bessie's guts spilling on the Mississippi Road. The poem breaks our expectation of what we believe or have been taught should be praised or considered holy. The diction or word choice makes movement on the page, invoking societal commentary. So this poem looks at society, all of the faces that inched toward freedom. Sing holy for all our singers and sinners. It's not leaving anyone behind. For all the shapes and forms of our liberation. The gods of our ancestors bellowing sunsets and blues that gave us vision. And at the end of the poem, it rings out as if a benediction that might carry its reader or listener off into the week on a Sunday. Holy, holy, holy. Now, why would someone like me look at a poem by this black man in New York written in the late 60s? Because there are obviously others that I could look at, including Lucille Clifton, Audre Lorde, Alice Walker. I could read another living poet's work instead, like Yona Harvey, Destiny Hemphill, or Nikki Finney. These are all writers whose work speaks to me in mind, that fell apart, that's okay, in mind, body, and spirit. So I will admit that I felt strange when I connected to this poem. I had to sit with myself and ask why this poem was grabbing me. So I asked you all a moment ago to think about your own connections to your own heritage. I asked you to think about your mothers, your fathers, your uncles, your aunts. I think Larry Neal's poem stands out to me because of a personal connection I have to the phrase holy, holy, holy. Remember, I'm hopeful that what we get out of our time together today is the poetry that lives or lived inside of the people closest to us. Not the famous person out there, but the average everyday person in your life that is speaking poetry and vision into our world. I believe Larry Neal's poem jumped out at me because every day, and several times a day, my grandpa Mose would sit down in his recliner, sigh or yawn, and say, holy, 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 and fall asleep. He would do that all the time. It's like a mantra in the back of my mind that I've never forgotten. So when I saw it in the poem, I just kept rereading the poem. It was as if he had written that into the poem. And that's what I'm wanting to get at. Like, we come from the same beauty that these poets everywhere are writing into and writing into books for us to find. And we also come from things that we'd rather not talk about, but poetry asks us to talk about those things too. I come from first ladies and ministers, drinkers and thinkers, dreamers and gatherers, parties, hugs and whoopings. I love you and see you later, not goodbye. I know children who sound like their dead grandmother when they speak. People who know how to hunt for food in the dark of night. People who can fish to feed an entire community. People who have taught generations of families. Some who gamble their checks away and pray to see tomorrow. I am of these people, and I believe their poems exist somewhere deep within my being, waiting for me to catch the images. And yes, I did witness my elders when they were alive, but I imagine my knowing or my knowledge comes from some place more spiritual than material, and poetry is a spiritual matter. So it doesn't shock me too much anymore when I'm reading poems from other time periods that sound like my aunt said it yesterday, or a line from a short story that seems to have fallen from some dead person's mouth. Instead, it feels like life moving and showing us what it means to be human and connected in larger ways than we know. I think poetry teaches us that there is more going on than we know all the time. Here's a poem I made that comes from my grandma's language, my own memory, and the land that I believe knows me way more than I ever will. So when I asked you all to think of the land where you grew up, I like to imagine, because trees and rocks and water has been here longer than any human, I like to think about what they think of us, if they think at all. I like to venture into these imaginative spaces. And so this is a poem where I'm imagining. Grain memory. A wishbone branch falls from my grandma Thelma's oak for me. What do you know about magic? He asks. He bends the old body down, turns the wishbone branch into a cross, places it around my neck. I am strapped at the Black River's right shoulder, remembering my grandpa Mose never wore anything but church. My purple head begins to feel cold as clergy, parched. I ask for water. He gives me water and rice, says to repeat after M. I am fly from nature, nature fly. 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 Ah, I get it. It's an affirmation, I say. And he laughs in wind ocean songs. He whispers, do not be trapped by language. A voice begins to beat my chest, cavity and rhythm, chaff threshed from grain, separating me from need. I thought I'd snapped that wishbone branch myself. No, I am fly from nature, nature fly. At dusk, gleaming marigolds gathered beneath my feet singing, we were stolen. Shipped across the Atlantic. Invasive is a word I heard. Stolen. Thrash, thrash, thrash. And we speak in bloom. Thank you. You'll notice, I'm sorry, thank you so much. You'll notice in that poem, Grain Memory, there is a stick talking to me, okay? That does not happen to me. I want y'all to know I don't walk outside and sticks talk. But I'll put it in my poem, okay? All the pronouns that would typically be he or she and absolutely binary in this poem are gender neutral using the pronoun e from Gullah Geechee language. E bends the old body down and turns. Caught that? I am a gender non-conforming person, which means that I don't follow typical gender norms. So when I moved back home in 2019, and I was learning more about my Gullah Geechee heritage and the people who came before me, I realized that my grandparents barely used the pronouns he or she. They said, where you going? He been right over there. Right? Gender neutral. Has nothing to do with gender. In many West and Central African languages, which are the languages from where Gullah Geechee language originates, gender neutral pronouns are used as well. In my poem, Grain Memory, I was trying to take you on a syntactical journey where in the language and the line breaks and the patterning of the phrases are recreating my own reclamation and emergence as a being accepting oneself as part of something bigger than themselves, as part of a lineage, as someone choosing to step away from the gender norms I was taught my entire life. It is also important that I read other Southern poets who have done similar work. One example would be reading Gabby Calvacaresi's Rocket Fantastic. Gabby's from Durham, North Carolina. And in their work, instead of using typical pronouns, Gabby uses a shape, and in that shape takes a deep breath. So that it would be, going where? that would be the pronoun. What's more spiritual than breathing and breath work? I want to say again, I don't normally talk to sticks, but what if I did? What would we talk about? What would I encourage the stick to do? What would the stick encourage me to do, and why? I am fly from nature, nature fly. Perhaps nature is encouraging me to be myself, to be fly. Who knows? I just have hopes for this talk. Nothing is definite. And I hope that what I'm explaining helps us learn how to listen to the voices, the places, and the people who have been speaking their poetry to me my entire life before I ever opened a book. I want to take a break and open the floor for questions, and then I'll share some more poems. So are there any questions so far? Any at all? Well, not any at all. Not any at all, but most questions. Most questions. Anything. And it's okay if you don't have any. I can jump right into poems. I'm seeing so many familiar faces. Yes.
I guess I persuaded you to go into poetry or wanted to write
Yes.
poetry?
What persuaded me to write poetry and to go into poetry? When I was young, I was a very shy kid, but in my house, I was not shy. So what I mean by that, I was the oldest, and I thought I was in charge of my little siblings, and I would have these tantrums. When I look back, I might have been 12, but I'm tearing the door off the hinges. I was so angry
Wow.
because I held I was bullied, and I didn't talk to my bullies. I went home and bullied my sisters, and that was how I got it out. And so my mom, who is right here in the back, who dealt with me all those wonderful years, but she would encourage me because she saw me writing in my journal. And usually I get very upset and go talk, at that time I would journal, "Dear God, they are making me angry." "Dear God, save me from these people. This is not my real family." And she would encourage me to keep writing. And then I went on into school and I studied psychology. I didn't study writing at all, but I always wrote and I always performed. I didn't begin to study poetry until 3 years ago as far as a serious, let me do this seriously. Up until then, it was more so journaling, crafting it my best into a poem based on what I had read and hoping it sounded like a poem. It's only now that I feel like I've gotten these big paragraphs and feelings and images into these lines that are a little bit more organized and taking someone by the hand and leading them into the poem. So it's been a part of me since I was 6.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
Very good.
Did I see another hand? I made it up. They're like, don't look at me. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I like reading poems, so I can do that. Thank you for listening to my talk. This book, as I stated earlier, is dedicated to imagination. So this first poem, it's more of a lyric poem, and it may be hard for you to find a story in it, but I'm going to ask that you listen to the words and just let yourself travel with the words. It's also a contrapuntal, which means that there's more than one voice speaking at once in this poem. So you'll hear me repeating certain words, and that's because I'm only one voice trying to do the voice of several voices. And the poem, I know you can't see it too close, but in the middle there, you'll see there's something traveling. That's the Black River. And it says home. Okay? And around that are other words that I'm going to say, and you'll hear that poem come together. Okay? Now, if you have this poem in front of you, you won't necessarily read it just like me. But that's the joy of poetry, because we all have a different voice that we bring to something that we find. The Black River. Whispered dreams. Spanish moss reached. When we moved back to where my parents grew up, I was eating more rice than I knew existed, and I did not want to be. Up and down. The village is known as Jackson Village Road. I didn't understand. Speaking to me telling me which of our dead. I had God. I have never prayed. home, 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 home. Why people were stories. I resembled so many cousins and so many questions for as much as I wonder. Home, home, home. I didn't understand home. Why people were speaking to me in home. Stories telling me home. Which of our dead home? I resembled home. So many cousins I had, home. And so many questions for God. I have never prayed home as much as I home. Home. Wonder. Home. 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 Origin. I was born on a fourth Sunday to my first lady, Grandma Thelma. My dark-skinned roll of hickory thigh meat and eyes disturbed her. She rubbed ambi skin fade cream into my face to bless me. I heaved for my petrified ma who would not cry. My father, my dark-skinned hope, in his arms I was cloaked beneath stars. My mother's mothers, my father's fathers worked. We were given a French last name, Dekine. Chartreuse blades of grass grew out of the spaces between their toes. The musty air filled with songs. My throat moans mimicking nightingales from the old world. I am bound for the kingdom. This poem is written after a song composed by Florence Price and sung by Marian Anderson. It's called I Am Bound for the Kingdom. My granddaddy Silas was born on the Nightingale Plantation in Plantersville, South Carolina, on riverbanks that loved. 3 generations of my kin captured in a green-tinted photograph hanging in my daddy's den. Tonight, my eyes will take each old world bird from the crop space, send them home with their songs and favorite foods. Look out for me, I'm a-comin' too. With rice, okra, hard-boiled eggs, and Lord Calvert. My daddy says if I get out of my car on Nightingale Land, the folks who own it might shoot. My daddy says never leave the driveway. Glory into my soul. I watch all of my ascendants, their faces reflecting me in that photograph. Their eyes are dead, black-eyed Susans. Y'all all right? This next one's a little creepy. Just go with me. You know that song, Heroes, Heroes from the Dead? You know what I'm talking about? This poem is called A Rose. In a dream, my daddy found his ma hanging one night inside a bedroom closet. She'd been dead 13 years. I was asleep and 9 years old. He said her mouth was a cave opening. Inside there was a choir of deacons, dressed and ready for the ritual. A trilling crescendo of sweet songs, nightingales who wanted to be filled by forgiveness singing, she rose from the dead. Grandma Lizzie cued the choir. They dragged my daddy in that last note. Every bird moaned at once, he gon' be just like he daddy. I watched turkey vultures gather over my family's field. Why we let nothing die easily? Hurricane family. When hurricanes come, my daddy prepares by rooting souls into the floors of our house. Rooted into the wetland his daddy poured Lord Calvert into. No longer a Buckras sharecropper, Grandma Lizzie and Granddaddy Silas rooted a bottle tree of 12 inconceivable indigo children. My daddy repeats to my ma, we'll be fine, and I believe. When the hurricanes came, it moved me more than I wanted. I hooked my innocence inside. Wild water became swords. My sisters and I played in swooning pine, dark, slick, splash, and I was terrified of people waking with blue earth inside their rooms. Worlds swept up from miles out all around. And in our front yard, I was afraid. While we ran, we danced, and we leaped. Y'all are letting me do one of my favorite things to do. Read poems.
That's great.
My dog leaves the room. And I'm not joking. I get started reading something out loud, practicing, and you just hear pitter-patter, pitter-patter, pitter-patter. I think he's over it. Jackson Village Road. You grew from your granddaddy's dirt and evergreen spaces. I want to start over and introduce this poem. Okay. Jackson Village Road is a persona poem. So if you can, I want you to imagine the road is speaking. Okay? Jackson Village Road. You grew from your granddaddy's dirt and evergreen spaces. There are gorgeous, colored greens, ripe yellows turning to golden reds, hanging from brown and moss-smothered trunks, standing tall all over the land he left. A black man, last name Jackson, quietly purchased land from a white man and sold acres of unworkable plots to your great-granddaddy. Your granddaddy, Silas, filled the swamp with dirt, gathered from the woods he slept beneath as a runaway child. On the south side of his house is where he used to plant. His brain was a farmer's almanac scrabbled with voices and visions. This too is your inheritance. His greens reached and sprawled beyond his containers, spilling into all his children's kitchen sinks. His mother and the life in his eyes died when he was only 10 years old. Your granddaddy was already all different kinds of blue, reaching, spreading, going on and on and on, talking to people he could not see. I'm going to read one last poem and then open up for any last questions that you all might have. I had the opportunity while studying poetry to go to Paris for about 60 days to study. And while there, my grandma Thelma was still alive. And when they told her where I was, "What you go over that big old water for?" is what my grandma had to say. What's she doing over there? So the title of this poem is "What you go over that big old water for?" My grandma Thelma. I wanted to find James Baldwin's signature and touch it while standing in the city where he body walked. I began searching for the Abbey bookstore in Paris. When I finally found the place, I found my grandpa Moses' daddy, Papa, shimmering in chartreuse, suspended mid-air and surrounded by books. He was reading Césaire, Fanon, and Ida B. Wells while sipping a bit of my grandma Thelma's muscadine wine dug up from the dirt. I'd only seen Papa in photographs. His smile was so familiar. I almost didn't see the red, white, and blue flags hanging above the bookstore entryway, French, American, and Canadian. I did see the colors blurring before my eyes, my breath frigid and picking up pace in my chest, my eyes searching for the big battle X that will not die. I forgot I was in Paris until Papa began to sing wide and deep as the Atlantic. Go down, Moses, way down. Papa, I walked with my shadow along the Seine River, and he didn't speak my name. I walked with my shadow along the Black River. Turns out, he always knew my name. When I got back, my ma handed me a book called Ebony Effects, 150 unknown facts about blacks in Georgetown, South Carolina. And he couldn't wait to show me your smiling face. And I touched it with my fingers. Thank you. Any questions at all? Yes.
So you said you went to France to study poetry. How did you do that?
How did I go to France to study poetry? I got my bachelor's first, and after you get a bachelor's, you can apply for a master's degree. But I didn't know I wanted to be a poet, so I did a master's degree in social work, and then I decided I want to do poetry seriously. And I found out that there's a master's in fine arts, and you can study creative writing. And so I applied to New York University, and they have a program that goes to Paris 3 times a year, and you go for 10 to 20 days each time. And I did that program for 1 year before I transferred to a program here in South Carolina at Converse University, because it was very expensive and I needed to change my life. But I enjoyed it while I was there, yeah. So always dream big. There's always a way to get somewhere that you think you cannot go. And the other way I got there was asking for help. I asked people to donate to help me go. And that can be something that's very scary and uncomfortable to ask for help. But you'd be surprised how many people from right here where I'm from who were very happy to see me go to Paris and experience this so I could bring it back here. So you'll be surprised about the connections you have and the people that want to see you do what your dreams are. Yeah, it's a good question. Any other questions?
It sounds like you also brought here over to Paris and through your poem. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yes. So it's a funny thing. I found that while I was away from home, I was able to write about home. While I was living in South Carolina, all of my poems were about somewhere else or about a protest going on in a city that has nothing to do with me, but me wanting to have some kind of connection. And when I left the country, I began to feel a little bit more rooted and connected to where I came from, which not only made me more passionate about these protests, but it made me feel more connected to the people I come from and figure out what it is I really want to say when I choose to speak. When I choose to write and share a poem, where am I sharing that poem from? And a very important poet, Kwame Dawes, encouraged me to get rooted. And I did not know what he meant by that. But I felt it in my stomach. And anytime I feel something in my stomach, I'm like, I need to pay attention to that. And so I found myself by, moving home because the program was too expensive. So I moved into my parents' house. I was very uncomfortable to be there. I had been away for 15 years. And I was like 33 and living in my parents' house again. And then I was able to write about home because I had already been away from home. It's like I saw home with new eyes. So the Black River wasn't just water. It was, this is the river that's raised all my families. We eat from this river. We go fishing in this river. These are the trees where the animals live that my uncle, when he goes hunting, he brings some of those animals back. It just brought the stories to me. And then listening to my elders some who were passing during this time that I came home, allowing their stories I didn't want to repeat their stories. I wanted to let their stories stir in me long enough so that I could find a way to say them in a different way. And I think poetry helps us do that. Yeah. Any other questions? I love questions. Okay. Well, the books, I have them with me today if you'd like to purchase one. They're usually, let's see, I've only paid $10 for them for the author price, and I'm at home, so I will sell them today for just $10. They're usually $16 if you buy them anywhere else. So if you want to get a book from me today, you'll get a little discount for listening to me. This is my first, professional lecture, and I'm very, very excited that it was here where I'm from. I graduated right here at Carver Bay High. So thank you all very much for listening to me. Thank you.